Welcome to Aircrew Interview. I'm Mike. In this episode we chat with Kirsty Murphy as she chats about flying and instructing on the Hawk T1, flying the Tornado GR4, being part of the Red Arrows, which to date she's the only female pilot to have joined the team, and her current role flying with the Blades, where you can find them at theblades.com. So if you like the channel and want to keep us going, you can head over to patreon.com/Aircrew Interview, where you can help us out for as little as $1 per month. And the link will be left up here, which you can see now. Or you can also donate by going to aircrewinterview.tv/donate. Thank you and enjoy. So Kirsty, when did you first become interested in aviation?
My father was in the Air Force as a navigator on Buccaneers and Tornadoes and Vulcans, so I kind of have had aviation in the family for a long time. Used to go to a few air shows and things, but I think it was probably when I started secondary school and my holidays were such that I had longer holidays than mum and dad, and I used to go and hang out on the squadron in the summer holidays, and that was when I really felt like aviation was very much part of what I understood and what felt very natural to me.
Yeah. So what year did you join the RAF?
I joined in 2000 is when I graduated from initial officer training, but I actually joined the Air Force a little bit before that because I was in the University Air Squadron and did my flying training as part of that before I actually joined the Air Force in 2000.
Ah, right. So could you tell us about the aircraft you started training on?
Yeah, so I actually had a flying scholarship, which was my first experience of flying. So I was 16 then, and I flew the PA-38, the Tomahawk. And then when I did my flying training in the Air Force, I started off on the Bulldog, which is a single-engine propeller aircraft, moved on to the Tucano, which is single-engine turboprop, and then onto the mighty Hawk T1, and that kind of got me through to the end of fast jet training.
And after your training, you went on to instruct on the Hawk. Can you tell us about this?
Yeah, so I was really fortunate. I'd done the course as a student, and then they select a few people who then go back and get taught to be an instructor and then teach that course that you've just done. So it's quite an early stage of your career to be an instructor. So it's quite a sort of flattering thing to be asked to stay, although all your friends go off to the front line and you kind of want to be doing that with them. But yeah, the Hawk T1 is a brilliant aircraft to fly and instruct on. The students that I was teaching have actually already know how to fly, but they've never flown a jet before. So I was teaching them how to sort of get those raw skills that they already have and put them towards fast jet flying. So yeah, it was really good fun. We did GH, so lots of aerobatics, circuit, lots of academic type maneuvers, spinning and stalling. We did close formation. We did what we call tactical formation, which is sort of ways of moving a formation around at low level without being close to each other, so maybe a mile apart. And then navigation as well. And then when they finish that course, they go off and do a tactical course where they learn all more tactics. So it was really good fun actually.
So did you stay with the same students the whole way through?
You generally get given what we call a primary student, or you're their primary instructor, so you're their main point of contact. But just the way the program works, you don't always fly with them, but you're the one responsible for their training. So you'd keep an eye on who's flown with them and how well have they done and that kind of thing. Depending on which trip you're doing, actually, you have different instructors because you need certain qualifications to do certain trips. So when I first became an instructor, I could teach all the basic stuff, but maybe not some of the more complicated things. And then by the time I finished my instructional tour, I was doing lots of that stuff and not so much of the basic stuff, which the new instructors were then doing. Yeah. So yeah, you do get to mix around students.
So what was the Hawk actually like to fly? Because everyone says it's like a little sports car.
Yeah,
is this true?
A sports car is exactly right. Yeah, it's very fast, it's manoeuvrable. It's simple, which is what makes it so brilliant for flying training. It doesn't have much kit in it, so you can actually focus on the basics of flying. And this is the T1 model that I'm talking about, which is the one I instructed on. So yeah, it was a real sort of favourite of mine for those reasons. I like the simplicity of it, but I like the speed, and flying around at low level in a Hawk, you just can't beat it.
Yeah, sounds pretty cool.
Yeah.
So could you tell if a student was a natural at flying?
It's a really interesting question actually. You'd get some students who did really well on the course that I was teaching, which is, like I said, quite academic, but then they'd get to the tactical stuff, and when they're required to think a little bit more outside the box and cope with more things going on, then they'd maybe struggle. We'd have maybe another student who didn't really shine doing what we were asking them to do, but then put them in the tactical scenario and they really blossomed. So I don't think you could ever particularly write anyone off or think that they were going to be brilliant during my course, and people who you thought at the beginning of the course were going to be fine, would struggle maybe at the end. So it was interesting. I do remember though one particular student I flew with, Martin Pert, who's now the leader of the Red Arrows, and he was superb. And I do remember landing off his jet thinking, yeah, he probably did that better than me. So some people do stand out.
Yes. So how long did you instruct on the Hawk for, and did you enjoy it?
Yeah, 3 years I instructed for, and I loved it. It was a very early stage of my career. I was given quite a lot of responsibility. By the end of my tour, I was leading a 3-ship up to, say, to Scotland. We'd stay there for a couple of nights. We'd do all our sorties from Lossiemouth or something, and then come back, and I would be responsible in supervising all of that. So it was really great. Flying with students is brilliant because they're so enthusiastic and they just want to know everything and be better. So you've got this sort of brilliant audience to impart all the knowledge to, and like I say, having that extra responsibility at an early age in your early stage of your career is quite an honour as well. So yeah, I look back on that tour with a lot of fond memories.
And then you went on to the mighty Tornado GR4.
That's right.
How this happened?
Yeah, so what happens is having been an instructor on that early course, I then needed to go and be a student again and learn all the tactical side of things on the Hawk T1. So I went off and did that course, and then at the end of that course you basically get graded, and then they sort of allocate you your frontline aircraft on how you've done on that course. Obviously dependent on how many spaces there are on all of those aircraft. So when I joined the Air Force, I really wanted to fly the Jaguar. That was my goal in life. Because I'd done this creamy tour, I now couldn't go to the Jaguar because they were bringing it out of service, so there were no spots. So I went, I got selected to go to the GR4. I had the GR4 and the Harrier as my 2 options. I would have loved to have flown the Harrier. I think my personality type meant that I was better suited to the Tornado, so actually going to the Tornado was the right decision for me.
Yeah. So can you tell us something about the initial training you started on the GR4?
Yeah, it's quite interesting because, of course, on your course, when you start on the Tornado, you've got pilots who have never flown the Tornado, but you've also got now a load of navigators who have also never flown the Tornado. So you start off separately and you do what's called a conversion phase, where I used to just fly with pilots, and they're teaching me to fly the Tornado, move the wings and how the systems work. But quite quickly you start flying with navigators and no longer pilots, and you're looking more at how to operate the aircraft tactically. And then you start putting your student friends who are on your course with you, who are navigators, in the back, and then both of you are blundering around Scotland together trying to make things work and make it happen. So it was a really interesting course. Took about 6 months. I think I started in the January and I was done by the July. It was quite a short, quick course. But yeah.
Can you remember your first trip in the GR4? I mean, coming from the Hawk, it must have felt a lot more powerful.
Oh yeah, hugely. I mean, the takeoff roll, 2 engines with afterburners, it's unlike, and it's definitely not like a Hawk at all. I don't actually remember my first trip in the Tornado on the OCU, but I was lucky enough to fly in the Tornado when I was on the University Air Squadron. And weirdly, I do remember that trip because it was so special and so out of my normal day-to-day routine. It's one of those things when you're on a course, actually, you forget sometimes to sit back and just enjoy what you're doing because you're so focused on passing and doing the right thing and learning. So yeah, that first trip is actually a bit of a blur. Probably was at the time as well.
Yeah. So how did the GR4 handle?
Very different to the Hawk. So when we talk about the Hawk being a sports car and highly manoeuvrable, the Tornado, I sometimes describe it as a double-decker bus, which surprises people because it's a jet. Surely it can't feel like that. But it needs to feel like that because it's a weapons platform. So it needs to be really stable. So you could fly through the valleys in the Lake District and you sort of feel like you're just going through them like this, and nothing's going to move you. You don't get bumped around by the air as much as you do in a Hawk, but that's what it's designed to do. It goes really fast. It does obviously turn, but doing air combat in it is quite, how can I put it? It's interesting as a pilot. It makes you work a bit harder. So designed for a different job though.
So how did you find the wing sweep function on the Tornado?
Well, once I remembered to use it. Yeah, no, the aircraft does talk to you actually a little bit when you're speeding up and you've forgotten to move the wings after takeoff. The airframe just starts to vibrate slightly, and you can just sense that something's not quite right. And you know, if you had forgotten the wings at that point, it's like, wings back to 45. And the same as if you're in 67. Obviously, as you slow down and your wings are that fully swept back, then you're really not producing enough lift as you slow down, and then you'd start thinking, this is not feeling. Oh God, the wings. So yeah, it takes a while to get used to doing, but actually, it's one of those things. You just becomes natural. You're speeding up, the wings go forwards. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So can you describe the cockpit for us? Because you came from, I'm guessing, an all analog gauge from the Hawk to is it a semi-glass cockpit?
Yeah, it is, yeah. So you've got some TV screens. the Tornado cockpit is a very classic cockpit from that era where you look inside and there are buttons everywhere and you think, oh my God, this is so complicated. But actually one of the boxes is a radio box and there's 15 buttons on it, but actually all they do is really set the frequency and select it, that kind of thing. So it looks amazingly complicated when you look inside, but when you break it down to the individual bits of kit, then it's obviously not so not quite so scary once you understand what it all does. So it's quite a comfortable cockpit compared to the Hawk. It's much roomier, it's much more comfortable, and full of kit.
So where were you based and what squadron were you with?
So the OCU was up at Lossiemouth on 15 Squadron, and then I got posted to 13 Squadron, unlucky for some, but not for me, which was at Marham.
Marham, yeah. So whereabouts in the UK would you fly?
It depended what we were doing. So the ranges are a couple of ranges that were close to Marham. We used to use a Wainfleet and Holbeach, and they were in the Wash, Lincolnshire Wash. So we'd maybe fly there and do some range work. We'd try not to fly too much low level around Norfolk and Lincolnshire because actually it's quite built up and there are speed restrictions and it's not very useful for tactical. It's great if you want to go A to B, but not if you want to do anything tactical. So what we'd often actually do is then fly over high level into somewhere like Wales or the Lake District or sort of South Scotland, and then we can do some of our more tactical stuff in those areas. There were ranges we used to go to and work with the Army, so do close air support, so we'd go high level over somewhere to help them, and then we'd spend the entire trip circling around where they are and then back home. So every trip, in fact this morning I was looking at my logbook to sort of think about my typical trip in a Tornado GR4, and there wasn't a single trip that was the same as another one.
You think though from a public perspective that would be quite
You're just doing the same stuff,
It
it's actually, I don't think I'd appreciated how varied each trip was. And of course the Tornado could carry so many different weapon types that you'd need to be completely familiar with. So we'd do one trip maybe doing Brimstone, another trip doing Paveway 2, another one Paveway 3, and sometimes doing pod work, so surveillance-y type things, sometimes doing CAS, sometimes doing more interceptor or sort of attack sorties, doing operational low flying, which is down at 100 foot, 4 ships, 2 ships, close formation, tactical formation. It was just, you can pick and choose almost. So very varied trips. It's good.
And I have to ask this because one of my Twitter followers asked me to ask you this. Did you always fly with the big tanks and the 2 pods on either wing?
Interestingly, Lossiemouth and Marham had slightly differing thoughts on whether we had 2 different types of fuel tanks you could have on the really big ones and the little ones. And Marham, we always used to have the big ones on, and Lossie used to have the smaller ones on. Possibly because of the fact that Lossie's obviously right up in Scotland, so their playground was really close, whereas for us we'd always have to transit somewhere. We did generally always have the fuel tanks on. We occasionally used to take them off to do transit flights. You can't go supersonic with the tanks on and with really anything on the wings. So every now and again you'd get a lucky trip where you needed to transit an airframe somewhere and they'd take everything off and you could fly up and go over the sea and go supersonic, which was always nice.
So it wasn't actually supersonic capable with like a fully
No, but you would never really need to be going supersonic with all that stuff hanging on it. It would be quite hard.
So did you ever fly on any operations overseas?
Yes, so I did Optelic, which when we were out in Iraq. So we used to fly out of Qatar, fly up the coast into Iraq and then do sort of a mission up there. And the missions were generally about 8 hours long, so really long. And I'd say the Tornado cockpit's more comfortable than the Hawk, but after 8 hours it's not comfortable at all.
Anything after that.
Yeah, and we've got G-pants on and our normal life jackets on, and then we'd wear a special combat survival waistcoat which has extra equipment that you might need if you did end up down on the ground and by accident. So it wasn't the most comfortable environment, but because it's 8 hours, we used to essentially do 2 refuels in that as well. So you'd get up there, maybe tank straight away or do a bit of what we would call a vol, so doing a tasking, then off to the tanker, which is overhead in Iraq but just quite high, then go back, do some more tasking, and then home again, and the whole thing would take 8 hours.
So how was it different from flying in the UK?
Well, almost all of it was at high level, obviously, because there was a threat there. So you don't want to be at low level unless you had to be. But also, it was real. Everything you do in the UK is training. So it does take on another level of seriousness, makes you think twice about everything you're doing. And also, you're talking on the radio, depending on what we were doing, our taskings could vary from, say there was a convoy going up a road or doing a long transit, we would maybe check the road for them using our pods and look and see if there are any IEDs and see if we could identify anything that would put them in danger. We might do that. We might have a group of Army, US or UK or even from somewhere else in the world doing a task maybe in a village, a mission in a village, and we would overwatch them and we could warn them if anything was going on that they needed to know about. And sometimes we were just on the radio talking to people in case they needed us, and we were just sort of on standby. So most of that was done at high level, looking down in a pod. And then every now and again we would have to do some low level flying, something called a show of force, which is essentially where we fly very low over the heads of maybe where a load of people are congregating that's got some kind of threat level with it. And just the idea of us flying over their heads, they may think that nobody knows that they're there, and they're like, where's that tornado come from? So they obviously know we're here, because they have no idea that we're way above them watching them. And that was flying very low. So you had this sort of very high level type stuff, and then suddenly you had to be right on your game to be flying low level and those skills, which is why we used to practice it still in the UK. But yeah, very different feel.
Was that a lot of pressure over there?
Having said it feels very different because it's serious. You're still also only doing what you have trained for, so it feels familiar. It feels different, but it's got that sense of, oh, we're in our processes now, and if you got called in to drop a bomb, for example, we have a set of procedures that you needed to follow to make sure that it all worked right, and also to make sure it was the right type of target to be going against. And so that sense of routine and procedure actually made things feel quite, I don't want to say comfortable, but I think familiar is probably the right word. So it's not like, oh my God, we've got to do this. Actually we went about our business in a very calm way. It was just sometimes after you drop the bomb, you'd kind of have this sort of surge of adrenaline of like, oh, we just actually dropped the bomb.
Probably natural.
Yeah, exactly. But when you're actually doing the job, you're so focused on it and you're doing what you know you need to do that I don't think you don't feel the pressure until maybe afterwards.
Of course. So how long did you spend on the Tornado, and did you enjoy it?
So I was there for 3 years, 06 to 09, and I loved it. And I loved the QFI that I did on the Hawk. And people often ask me which one I preferred. They were such different jobs, instructing people compared to doing stuff for real on a front line. It's such a different aircraft, such a different role, and it was so satisfying to be able to be part of that team. So really enjoyed it.
So then something special happened. You managed to become a Red Arrow. Can you tell us about this?
Yes. So I was walking down the corridor in the squadron one day, this was when I was on the Tornado, and I noticed the advert was up. And so to get in the Red Arrows, you have to apply, you have to want to do it. And there's a list of criteria that you have to fulfill. So I went up to the poster to have a look, and I'd been on the squadron for about 2 years by now, and my Creamy tour. And I suddenly realised I ticked all the boxes, and I'd never realised that I would be in a position where I could join the Red Arrows if I wanted to. And I went away and I just had this like seed in the back of my head, and I just couldn't get rid of it, and I ended up putting my application in. And then it's quite a long drawn out process. They select, or they sort of pre-select, I think they get about 30 people applying every year, and then they shortlist somewhere around about 9 normally, who then go out to spend some time with the team, and that's for a whole week. And there's various, you do a flying test, you do an interview, you do a media interview, and then throughout the whole week there are social events going on so they can see what you're like, obviously socially, because that's really important that you're not a great pilot, you also have to do this other side to the job. And then I was lucky enough to have been selected out of the 9 that went out on the shortlist. It was great.
So how did you feel when you got that call or email or however you got told?
I do remember kind of screaming down the front. It was amazing. We got called into my boss's office, and we knew the results were coming out that day, so there was sort of a nervous tension around, and I walked in, and then he just grinned at me and he said, "You did it." And I genuinely didn't think I was going to get in. Most people get onto the shortlist, do it once, don't get in, and then reapply the next year, and then the team know them, and they're like, okay, and you generally do better the second year. So I fully expected to go to the shortlist and just kind of enjoy it as much as I could, learn as much as I could, so the year after I'd definitely get in. So it was genuinely a real shock. And also I got in with my best friend, who had gone in exactly the same as me, thought he wasn't going to get in at all, and then we both got in together, so it was brilliant.
And do you get told what position you're going to be for the first season?
Yeah, so you join the team around about August, September, which is actually the end of the previous season, and you essentially fly around with them for that period. And the idea is you can start to absorb some of their procedures and some of the things that they do normally, and then you start your actual training at the end of the season, which is kind of October time, or the beginning of the next one, if you like. And yeah, so once we arrived, there was a big ceremony, and everyone gets told their positions for the next year, and that's it.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So how intense was the training at the beginning?
It's really intense. The first trip, I'm not quite sure what I was expecting, but the first trip, there's me, Ben Plank, my friend, and the boss, and we sat down to brief, and he said, right, so we're going to start off doing loops. I'm like, right, formation loop, right, okay, we haven't done those, I've never done those yet. And he's like, no, that's how we do it. And we just start off doing loop after loop after loop after loop, and then we progressed on to barrel rolls after barrel rolls after barrel, and it just goes on, and you fly 3 times a day, 5 days a week, until PDA pretty much. Bad weather, obviously, depending. And by the end of the 3rd or 4th week, I was coming home from work in the evening, I'd sit on the sofa, be asleep by 7:30. I was exhausted. The sort of focus that was required for those 20 minutes for those trips was just insane, and it was exhausting. But you get used to it, and then and you cope with it better.
So what was, I think it's called, is it Red Suit Day?
Yes.
What was that like for yourself?
It was a bit of an interesting one for us because we had a delayed PDA, which is the Public Display Authority. Because one of our pilots had ended up getting injured, so couldn't then fly, so we'd had to bring a new pilot out to replace him, so ours was delayed. So normally that would happen out in Akrotiri at the end of spring training, but actually we'd come back to the UK, we did some more training in the UK, and it happened there. So it was held at Scampton, which was really rare. It doesn't normally happen like that. It was quite nice to be at Scampton to get the red suit, and it feels really weird because you've been wearing a green suit all winter. You only wear your red flying suit when you've been given the PDA, and it was quite amazing to keep looking down and catching sight of the red suit, go, oh my God, I'm a Red Arrows pilot.
So what was it like being the first female on the team?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. When I was thinking about applying, there were quite a few girls that I knew who were pilots who hadn't applied, who were perfectly capable of it, I've no doubt. And I asked them why they hadn't applied, and they said to me, I don't want to be the first girl on the Red Arrows. They don't want all that extra pressure and everything that goes with it. And I understood that. But equally, I thought I can't allow that to be the reason that I don't do something. So I decided that I was going to just get on with it, get my head down. And actually, when you watch the Red Arrows, you have no idea which pilot's in which aircraft generally. So no one would really know which one was me. It was only when we're on the ground. And I thought that was that was the right way to be. If I thought about it like that, then I wouldn't have any of the perceived added pressures. I was really lucky. I was supported by the squadron a lot, and we did, obviously the public were quite excited to hear a girl was going to be on the Reds. So we did one big media day when it was announced that I was in the team, and essentially everyone was asked, well, you come and do your interviews and you're filming everything today, and from then on leave her alone. She's not going to be doing separate interviews, because when you're in the Red Arrows you're part of a team, you're not an individual. So they kind of allowed that to happen for one day only, and then that was it. And that was great because that allowed me then just to get on with the job really. And like I say, I've worked in the Air Force for quite a few years by then, and I'd worked alongside a lot of the people that were in the Red Arrows, so to us it was nothing weird or unusual. Every time I went to a new air show, someone would go, oh my God, there's a girl in the Red Arrows, and I'd have to go through the whole thing again. But yeah, hopefully when people were watching the display, they couldn't tell which one was me anyway.
So can you remember your first public display?
I do, and it was at RAF Brize Norton actually. And it was one of their family's days. And the reason I remember it is because I've got a photo, which I still have, and we landed, did the display, and I remember my heart really racing as we ran in. And then as soon as we put that smoke on for the first time, the rest of the trip just happened, because you've done the show so many times by then that you're doing what you know. And then we landed, and then we went and did a bit of sort of chatting to the public, and these 3 girls came over, they're all red-headed as well, which I thought was great. And they came over and they all hugged me and they went, we want to be Red Arrows pilots too. And I just thought, wow, I'd had this very rational thought process about being a girl in the Red Arrows and doing this one media day, and then I realised these young girls saw it and thought it was a cool thing. And I thought, that's brilliant. If I can just keep doing that, then I'm really happy.
That must have been a special moment.
It was really special, and I've got this picture of me crouching next to them and having my photo, and I've still got it. Yeah, and I remember the picture being taken. It's brilliant.
So do you have a favourite manoeuvre you did on the team?
Yeah, it's hard. It's always hard to pull one out. And the show as well split into two. You do the first half, which is all the big graceful manoeuvres and the big shapes, and then the second half is the dynamic stuff. But the one I really remember, which I used to fly my second year, I can't remember the name of the shape. It was something like Concorde or Blackbird. And then myself and Eggman would be on the extremities, and we pulled up into a loop, and then we'd both do rollbacks, and then end up further back in the formation and finish off the loop there. And it was a challenge to match those rollbacks between us and make it look good, but equally it was quite a dynamic thing to be doing. So yeah, I do look back at that one, and I was always really pleased when we'd nailed it. Which wasn't every time, sadly.
I've always been interested, you know, the way they speak in the cockpit. How did you get used to that?
Practice, really. As I said earlier, we used to spend a bit of time with the team before you actually start flying with the team, and that's the whole point of that, is to absorb all these procedures. There's a whole book of procedures that Red Arrows use, but they've all been developed over a very long period of time, and they're all to keep the team safe. So they're all vitally important that you understand them and you do them correctly. The radio calls are a classic thing. So the boss will tell the formation what the next shape is going to be, and then that's acknowledged by every single aircraft that's going to move. So that could be 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. It could just be, you know, 3 and 4. But that has to happen exactly right before anybody moves. And if it's worked right, then everybody then does what they need to do. If it breaks down in any way, someone maybe didn't hear the radio call or something else had happened, then nobody moves, and that's what keeps the team safe. So yeah, you almost end up with like a song or a poem of the words that happen in a display. And in those first couple of months, I'd dream about it. You know, I was having all these radio conversations in my head. But it's key to what they do. And actually, even now flying with the Blades, all of our procedures are based on those very same radio calls we used to make in the Reds.
So what positions did you fly on the team?
So I flew as 3 and 5, which are both on the left-hand side, and then I did 9. I started training as 9, but I didn't do the full season.
And did you have a favourite show you displayed at?
I do have one that really stands out. I should point out that whenever you do a display in the Red Arrows, unless you're the boss, you're generally not looking at anything other than the boss, the leader. So I've flown over some amazing sites and not seen any of them because I'm just staring at number 1 and doing what I need to do. But there's 2 I remember. One was in my first year, we flew over Athens, and as we ran in crowd rear, the boss said, "Okay, this is unusual, everyone can have one quick glance out of the window." And I sort of looked down and I could see the Acropolis, and then I looked back and I was like, ah! And then we were into the show. So I really remember that because I actually got to see something. The other one I remember actually was Windermere. It was the last day before our summer leave, so we were all really looking forward to that. We'd displayed, I think, in Southport in the morning. It was a beautiful afternoon. It was a late show, so it was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And unusually for the Lake District, it was really still, super smooth air. And that show just ran on rails. Just, there were so few mistakes. It was brilliant. It was as close to perfection as you could get. And we all got back to Scampton, and then we're all off on leave. And I do remember just thinking, I've got the coolest job in the world.
Yeah, definitely. So what do you think was the most special thing about being part of the team?
There's so many parts to it. I mean, the flying from a professional, personal point of view was brilliant. It's such a challenge, not just to attain that level of flying in the first place, but to maintain it and to keep doing that and getting better and better throughout the year. So the flying side of it was great, but also the people we got to meet, whether that's famous people and celebrities, which is fun from my point of view to meet them, but also, for example, pre-Christmas we always used to go down to Great Ormond Street Hospital, and we'd go around and just chat to all the children in our red flying suits. And it's moments like that that really make you very humble and remind you of who you are and what the red flying suit means to a lot of people around the country, and that's a really special thing to be part of that.
So how long do you spend on the Reds?
It was about 2.5 years, 2 seasons, 2010 and 2011 season. It's really hard work. I look back thinking it was brilliant. There were times when I thought, God, I wish I'd just done a really boring job or done something else. Without a doubt, there are highs and lows. It's really tough. But yeah, absolutely. Like I say, it's an amazing honour to wear the red flying suit.
So what did you do after the Red Arrows?
I got promoted out of the Red Arrows, so I went and did what we call a staff college course for the next rank, and then I went and worked in headquarters, which was in charge of all the fast jet flying training, so the Hawks that I'd already flown, the Tucanos, but also we looked after the Red Arrows, so it was really nice to be able to give back by having been in the team, to be able to help them out with some of the things that they needed assistance with from a headquarters point of view, from the administrative stuff. So I did that for a few years, and then I left the Air Force in 2015.
As people can see, there's
Yes.
a blade behind us. So
Yes.
can you tell us about how you became part of the team?
Yeah, so the Blades is a four-ship aerobatic team of extra 300s, which is one of these, but we're made up from ex-Red Arrows pilots. That's our sort of heritage. So the company itself started in 2008, an ex-Red Arrows leader and an ex-Harrier boss, and they had noticed that people want to fly with the Red Arrows, but you cannot do that. It's impossible. But they thought they could set up something which would recreate that idea of being able to fly with the Red Arrows by using ex-Red Arrows pilots and an aircraft that was interesting to fly. And they set up the company. And the best thing about flying this aircraft rather than the Hawk, other than the fact it's obviously quite a lot cheaper to run, is it's fully aerobatic. So we could do the close formation, smooth stuff, but we can do some really crazy aerobatics that you cannot do in a Hawk because it's a jet and you need constant airflow down the engine. So when I left the Air Force, I was looking for another job, and I looked at lots of different options, project management, and I just kept coming back to 2XL as this idea that I could actually be a Blades pilot. So I approached them, and here I am.
So what year did you join?
That was in 2016.
And what position were you in at that point?
So I joined as 3 again.
3?
So
Wow.
yeah, people probably don't realise flying on the left and the right is very, very different. So to me, a right-hand turn always involves going up and right, because I'm on that left-hand wing. When you're 2, a right-hand turn always involves going down and right, and that's now instinctive. So flying on the opposite side is a little bit like getting on one of those bikes where they've switched the handlebars around and they work the other way around. It's actually quite difficult. So it's quite nice to, when you start a new formation team, is to join on the side that you know best.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I've been 3, which suits me down to the ground.
Yeah. So how many aircraft actually fly in the team?
We've got 5 airframes, but we've got 4 aircraft in the display.
And I would like to know something about your training. Was it difficult coming from the Reds, or was it the same?
Similar intensity, actually the same. So I joined in May and I was displaying in July, and I was looking at my logbook this morning, and the intensity of the flying that I did here in those 2.5 months was the same as the Reds, but obviously it was shorter. And the reason it was shorter is because the Blades relies on the fact that I can already fly a loop in close formation, and also my sort of fundamental principles and thought processes on maybe how to react to an emergency or how to do formation moves are all instinctive because I've had 3 years training essentially in the Reds.
So who creates the routines each year?
It's a bit of a joint process. Obviously the leader gets priority because it's his team and he can do what he wants, frankly, but he always asks for ideas. So we had a lot of changes last year. We had a new rebranding, so we're all in sort of navy blue and red now. Last year, or the year before that, sorry, we were sort of black and orange. So quite exciting times, and it seemed a really good time to really sort of change up the sequence. So Andy Evans, Blade 1, definitely led on that, and we sort of inputted a few bits that we wanted to change. But it's nice, with the way we've developed the display, we can actually continually tweak it and put little changes in, which is great because we can then keep moving the display forwards.
As people can see in the background, it's a really nice livery, and so who creates that? Who designs that?
Again, a bit of a team process. This one's a really interesting livery because this year as well, we had the exciting news that Ben Murphy, who's our head of department and was Blade 1 last year, was going to have a Blades racing team in the Rebel Air Race. So he bought an aeroplane to do that, and he needed a design scheme, which he kind of came up with a bit himself with some help from some professional companies, and ended up having this aircraft done up with stickers and paint and looked amazing. And then we looked at it and said, oh, the aero team should really kind of reflect the racing team as well. So very rapidly, we ended up with 5 aircraft that look very similar to Ben's. Now he doesn't fly an Edge, he flies doesn't fly an Extra, he flies an Edge 540, but it's very similar in that it is tail wheel, similar kind of design. So we tweaked it to make it work for our aircraft, but we now essentially match the racing team, so we've got sort of one corporate brand. As you can see, we really wanted to, in the race team, we really wanted to promote the fact that we're a British team, so we've got the huge Union Jack on the tail, but it's also really important for us to be able to represent our sponsors. So we've got the RAF Benevolent Fund, which is a military charity, obviously linked to the RAF, which is very close to all of our hearts because we're all ex-Air Force. So we've got them on the back, and then we've got Zyrad Cables and Aerobites as well, who are the 2 main sponsors, and they support both the aerobatics team and the race team. And then finally on my flying suit, we've got Aston Martin Cambridge, which we all like having as a sponsor. We're hoping they're going to give us cars at some point, but not yet happened.
So how many air shows do you fly a year, and how long is the actual display?
And the display is 12 minutes long, and we do 30 manoeuvres in that time. So you can imagine how full and how frantic it is flying, which is why I love flying the display. So we do 30 manoeuvres in 12 minutes, which makes it a really dynamic and quick moving show. So we start off the display doing very much the formation bits and pieces, so a bit more of the graceful, smooth stuff where we're all together, and then we split up, and this is where we're different to the Red Arrows, is we can split up and then start doing some of our singleton aerobatics, so launch racks and gyroscopic manoeuvres. And in fact, it's really exciting. This year we've been working with Gerald Cooper, so he's our first pilot who's not been in the Red Arrows, but the reason we picked him is because he's actually national champion at unlimited aerobatics, and he's been top 6 in the world for the last 5 years. So this guy is incredible at flying individual manoeuvres. So we're teaching him formation, and in return he's teaching us some more exciting individual manoeuvres, which is quite good.
So could you name all the pilots on the team at the moment?
Yeah, so we've got Andy Evans, and he's Blade 1, and we've got Blade 2, and I'll tell you next year's teams is going to be me and James McMillan sharing that position. Blade 3 next year is going to be Mike Ling, who everyone will remember as Red 10, and then we've got Gerald Cooper as number 4, and also James McMillan, so they'll sort of share that space.
So do you get to inspire a lot of younger generation aviators in the making?
I hope so. Well, when we get to air shows, we always try and get on the ground and do some PR as well, and we always get such a great response. I think people are interested because we're ex-Red Arrows pilots, and it's hard these days to actually get to go and meet the Reds, so we're a way for people to come and talk about the Red Arrows. But also, I think they like to see the show because it's so kind of crazy manoeuvres, and also because we actually will fly passengers. So we say that in our commentary, you know, if you'd like what you've just seen, you can come and fly with us at Sywell, and we fly people through some of these manoeuvres which people like. So I think there's a lot there that we are quite tangible. People can come and meet us, and we're not sort of hidden behind closed doors or anything. So yeah, I hope we do inspire people. We get a lot of very positive response from us, definitely.
Brilliant. And where can our viewers find the Blades online?
We're on theblades.com, and you can Google us, and we're also on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram.
So Kirsty, do you have any hobbies?
I had a lot of hobbies, and then I had a child and a full-time job, and that got rid of some. But no, I've always loved the mountains, actually. So anything in the mountains, whether it's walking, mountaineering, climbing, mountain biking, that's what I love to spend my spare time doing. My son's a little bit too small to be climbing mountains with him at the minute, but hopefully we'll be able to get back to it soon.
Yeah. So do you have a favourite aircraft you've flown?
I get asked this a lot, and it's really difficult to pick one out. I've got such fond memories of the Hawk for the Red Arrows, but also all the QFIing I did. But like I say, the Tornado was designed for such a different thing, and I felt so sort of invincible in it, which is exactly how I needed to feel. And then nowadays, flying this is just insane. So I think possibly this aircraft, but I would say it's like really borderline between all three.
It's all difficult, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
Is there an aircraft you wish you could have flown that you haven't?
Well, I always wanted to fly the Jaguar, and I had luckily managed to get a backseat trip, so I have been in one and flown around at low level, and it was as brilliant as I thought it was going to be. So I wouldn't quite say I regret not getting to fly it, but I do wish I had. And obviously I would love to fly a Spitfire, goes without saying.
So are the team active over the winter months?
Yeah, so it's a full-time job, but obviously in the summer we were so busy doing air shows, and now we haven't got any air shows to do. But we do corporate days, so we have passenger flying, people come and pay, and we take them through all our aerobatics, which is great fun. But also we also have a sort of an events organising cell. So in the winter, that's when we do a lot of our big planning for our big projects that are going to happen next year. So we work with some of our sponsors, so we do quite a lot with Aston Martin. And I sort of act as a go-between between the stuff that happens on the ground, whether it's marquees or whatever needs planning, but also linking the aviation in, and often cars into driving up and down runways, and how are you going to get cars onto runways and aeroplanes, and how's that going to work. So I'm quite busy in the winter organising lots of events.
So busy all year round.
Yeah, it's good.
Brilliant. So can we find yourself on social media?
Yes, you can. I'm at Kirsty Murphy 18 on Twitter.
And finally, do you ever get sick of talking about aviation?
Never, actually. I'm very passionate about it. I love it. It's obviously been my life. I've been a pilot for 20 years now. And if I can talk passionately about it to other people who are passionate about it, then yeah, I can sit in the bar and talk all night long if you want.
Brilliant. Well, Kirsty, thanks very much for being on the show.
It was a pleasure to meet you. Thank you.